welcome to this review of my Keychron V6 keyboard. A recent comment from a viewer got me thinking about this keyboard. Obviously, a lot of people ask me, I want to get my first mechanical keyboard, what should I get? And I generally just answer with, get a cheap $35 or so mechanical board from China, doesn't really matter which one, because I think it's pretty much impossible to give a good, specific recommendation for someone who has no experience with mechanical keyboards. At this point, they probably don't really know what they like and don't like. Plus, even if I were to recommend a really good high-end one, they probably wouldn't be able to appreciate the quality without having a baseline comparison. However, last time I mentioned this, someone in the comments said that they tend to recommend a V6 instead, which is a budget model from Keychron. Now, the V6 is kind of a medium-priced keyboard. The base price is $89 for a fully assembled one, but so far it seems to be on an eternal discount to $74, and the bare-bones version is $69 or $59 discounted. So it is considerably more expensive than a cheap mech from China, more than twice as much really, but it does have a few nice things about it, and the Keychrons I've reviewed so far have been pretty good, especially in terms of value for the money. So that got me thinking, would I recommend this keyboard to new users instead of a cheap-ass random Chinese mech? So I requested one from Keychron, and they were nice enough to send one. They gave me a fully assembled V6 because the bare-bones version had a longer delivery time at the moment. I was going to put in my own switches anyway, more on that later. Click the timestamp in the description to skip to them. But do note that the bare-bones version doesn't include keycaps. There is also a version with a volume knob on it, but that's $10 more, and I wanted to see if it would hold up as a cheap board, so I didn't take that option this time. Now, one of the most useful features in this context that the V6 comes with is hot swappability, which means that you can take out the switches and put in new ones without having to do any soldering. Although hot swappability is more and more becoming a standard feature, the really cheap clone boards don't appear to have this yet. Now, the good thing about this, and presumably one of the main reasons to get this as a starter board, is that you can start off with some random switch, and then as you get a feel for it, you can try other switches, or maybe just switch over entirely as your taste for switches matures. The upside is that you don't have to keep buying a new keyboard every time you do this, or keep soldering your arse off. Of course, there are other mid-budget hot swap chassis out there, but the V6 has a few more side benefits, including programmability through QMK and VIA. The last one is very important, as many newcomers will find QMK confusing as hell, but VIA is very easy to use. It even has 4 extra buttons on it that you can use for macros, shortcut keys, etc. It's a very nice touch. Let's start off with the build quality, because this is an immediate differentiation from many other cheap keyboards out there. It's quite impressive, weighing in at 1.4 kilos, or in imperial units, that's roughly the weight of a keyboard. Of course, being a full size, it's going to weigh more than most 60%, but 1.4 kilos is the same as a Dell Bigfoot keyboard. And that kind of says something, because the Bigfoot is a vintage keyboard with a big-ass steel mounting plate in it. And that makes sense, because so does this. Nice. The housing is ABS. You can get it in slightly transparent black, which is what this one is, or opaque black. It feels pretty tough actually. It flexes a bit, but not especially much for a full size. Remember, bigger keyboards obviously flex more. It's dense. It honestly doesn't come across as a budget keyboard. Again, this is quite in character for Keychron. The back of the keyboard shows that it comes with 2-part flip-out feet, so you can set it to different heights, and they were even nice enough to give them rubber pads on the feet so it doesn't slide around. Very nice. There's no cable gutter on the rear, but considering the cable positioning right here at the back, you don't need it anyway. Plus, and I almost gasped at this, it's got actual bolts on the rear panel. So you can take it apart and clean or service it if you need. I wish this wasn't a feature I'd have to mention, but it's pretty rare to see this on modern keyboards, even premium ones. So that's really good. The keycaps are double-shot PBT, which is excellent. They'll last you a lifetime, and I think they look good too. It comes with Windows and Mac keycaps and a switch on the keyboard to toggle between the two modes. Do note that it doesn't have an ISO version, so if you're used to that or you have a very country-specific layout, that might be a problem. There are some other features as well, such as a silicone mat in the case to dampen the sound, and of course, RGB backlighting. It's actually quite decent looking RGB as well, but the keycaps aren't transparent, not even the lettering, which on one hand means that the keyboard looks less ostentatious, but it does mean you don't need to use the RGB to be able to see the lettering. In fact, the LEDs shine quite brightly into your eyes through the gaps between the keycaps under the right angle, so in case that's bothering you, it might be better to just switch it off. So overall, I'd say this is actually pretty good. Unless you have a very specific switch in mind that you want to try out first, I just go with the assembled version. It's only $15 more, and that's not a lot for a full-size board's worth of switches and a nice keycap set like this. And then afterwards you can get some other switches and mix it up a little bit, maybe swap to something else. Definitely a good board. Would I recommend this as a starter? I'd say for someone who is serious, yes. And who has a bit of money, because it's still $89 or $74 discounted, which is good value but still not cheap. If you're not even sure whether mech keyboards are going to add value for you at all, that's a more expensive guess than it has to be. In those cases, I'd still go for a $35 Chinese board. For someone who really has no experience with mechs at all, I'd still recommend one of those instead. But for someone who has a bit more of an idea what they want, maybe tried some things already in a shop or at a meetup, I'd say this is definitely an excellent first board. Now, like I said, I put some different switches in it, specifically Gateron Melodic. It's worth noting that these switches have nothing to do with the keyboard, they're just what I chose to put inside it, and whenever possible I like to review a keyboard and a switch type I haven't reviewed yet, just to get a nice twofer. I've had requests up the actual arse to review these, so let's have a look at them. They're clicky switches, and they're basically the same as Gateron's own KS22 switches, except they're not optoelectric, but electromechanical instead. That means it's not as exotic, and it fundamentally lacks some of the smoothness inherent to contactless switches, but contactlessness is mainly noticed on linear switches. Tactile and clicky switches tend to mask unevennesses in the key travel anyway, plus they do have the advantage of fitting in a regular MX-type chassis, as optoelectric switches are not generally compatible with standard PCBs laid out for contact-based switches. The thing that made everybody want me to review these, I'm sure, is that it has a click leaf in it, which is basically a leaf spring that acts as a snapping hook to create a clicky noise and tactility. The concept is most well known from the Alps SKCM series of switches, particularly Blue Alps, which I've reviewed to quite high praise before on this channel. The hooks, or teeth, of the leaf spring create a specific type of tactility that's very different from the tactility generated by slider notches, which is how Cherry MX-type switches create tactility. It's much snappier and sharper, and the slapping noise of leaf springs creates a very different, less plasticky and especially rattly sound than the click jacket that MX-type switches use. This is why the feel and sound of clicky leaf spring switches is often pretty well liked, and presumably why they named the switches melodic. Now, the click leaf they put in is positively microscopic, so small that it's easy to overlook even. Here it is compared to the click leaf of a Blue Alps switch, and to the tactile leaf of a Fujitsu magnetic reed switch, although that one is admittedly quite gargantuan. This one is really small though. It doesn't feel or sound the same as Alps, I should probably mention that first. I even treated myself to a day of my Omni Key 102 with Blue Alps, which is a great keyboard. It's arguably the worst sounding Blue Alps keyboard I have, but that's not saying much. Here, let me give you a demonstration. I mean, there is a reason I call these the motherfucking Beethoven of mechanical switches. The difference in sound is partly due to the different chassis, and of course a bigger click leaf can make a thicker slap sound. Plus, as you can tell, the click itself of the melodic switches is way higher pitched. It's almost at the hearing limit. But Alps switches also have a very bassy bottoming out sound that these switches just can't reproduce. The tactility is also quite different. Believe it or not, these tiny click leaves give a much stronger, I'd go as far as to say harsher, tactility than Alps switches. I noticed the same thing with the KS22, which is the optoelectric version of this switch. Some people believe Alps switches are mega tactile, but they're not really. It's just a very clean, sharp tactility. The bump itself isn't even that big. These little fuckers, though, they're quite tactile to the point of being slightly punishing on the fingers. Now, I've been using a lot of featherweight linear boards of late, so my fingers had gotten used to very delicate feeling switches, but even compared to Alps, these feel noticeably more severe. They're nowhere near as excessive as Zeal PC Clicky's switches, which took a full Alps-sized click leaf and stuck it in an MX housing, and they're not mega aggressive or anything, but if you're not used to genuinely tactile feeling tactile switches, these may come as a bit of a surprise to you. As for a direct comparison, I don't think these feel or sound as good as Blue Alps switches. They just lack refinement in both areas. That said, they are definitely not bad switches, especially for modern ones. If you want to try some switches you don't have to lurk on eBay for several months and pay through the nose for, this is a pretty competitive option, I think. They definitely feel and sound way better and especially cleaner than any standard MX-like click jacket switch I've ever tried. I got mine from Mech Keys. They're a bit under 70 cents a piece. I'll put a product link for both the keyboard and the switches in the description below. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.